Father Vogel, we continue our series of St. Francis de Sales' Introduction to the Devout Life. We are in 4 chapters in his third part of his book, dealing with the virtue of humility. We looked at external humility as well as interior humility. And now this chapter is entitled, Humility Makes Us Love Our Own Abjection. So abjection is probably not a word that we use all that often in common usage today. But abjection basically means a littleness or a lowliness. Even in a sense of being humbled or being humiliated, in a sense. That's what abjection is. So humility makes us love our own smallness, our littleness. It says the virtue of humility is the real knowledge and voluntary recognition of our abjection, loving it and taking pleasure in it. So most of us, we probably take pleasure the more that we are esteemed, the more that people show love for the things we do. But he says we should instead love that which makes us smaller. So that's the John the Baptist, Jesus must increase, but John the Baptist must decrease. It's the same thing for us. Jesus must increase and I must decrease. And this is what abjection is, that kind of smallness. So it says it's to exalt the divine majesty and to esteem our neighbor all the more in comparison with ourselves. To see ourselves as lowly like Mary. God has looked upon the lowliness of his handmaid. And it's in our lowliness that God then exalts us. So humility too is related to the previous virtue of patience that we talked about. He says that we love the evil, or the whatever it is that occurs to us that we have to be patient with. We love it through patience, but we also cherish the abjection by the virtue of humility. So whatever kind of suffering or evil that we have to go through, it really points out our littleness, our smallness, our inability to overcome it by ourselves. And so that's humility. Patience helps us to love and endure whatever it is that's going on itself, and humility helps us to love the fact that it makes us small. So he says that this will sometimes even occur when in the midst of practicing other virtues, especially virtues that other people don't esteem. So he says, to give alms and to forgive insults are both acts of charity, but the first is honored by everyone, but the second is despised by the world. So yes, people would honor you for, we honor people who give in charity even if they're not Christian. We're like, wow, that's a good person. But to forgive insults, our world doesn't see that as a virtue. They would see that as, no, you need to get back at the person who insults you. He gives an example. He says, a young man or young lady who will not fall into the disorders of a dissolute group in order to speak, play, dance, drink, and dress like the rest, will be ridiculed and criticized by others. Their modesty will be called either fanaticism or pretense. To love this is to love abjection. So, isn't that I think it's a very good example. It holds true in our time as it must have during St. Francis's time, that young people have this great peer pressure from their groups to act exactly the way their others do. And if they don't, then they can be ridiculed because they don't follow along with the crowd. That's very true for, I think, our Catholic young people, as they strive to live out the faith and at times have to suffer the ridicule of their friends who, when they refuse to do certain sinful activities, when they won't participate or condone them. He says to love this, to love the fact that we are made little, that we have this kind of humiliation or smallness within us. To love that is to love abjection. And so that's what humility, the virtue of humility, enables us to do, to love even that smallness. He says, we love the abjection resulting from an evil. We should not fail to set right the evil, which is the cause of it by suitable and lawful means. So in the case, even when we sin, when the sin is pointed out to us, that cuts through our pride, right? And it humbles us to have to admit that I'm at fault. So like when we go to confession, that's a great act of humility to tell the priest that indeed I have sinned. And so we should love the fact that we have this smallness, that it's recognized within us that we are not great, we're not perfect. We shouldn't love the sin itself, but we should set it right by whatever means we can. But the fact that one of the goodness that could even come out of our failures is the fact that it makes us realize our smallness, our reality of who we are compared to God. It says, the objections most profitable to us and pleasing to God are those which happen to us by unforeseen events or by our condition of life. For we have not chosen these, but received them as such as God sent them to us, whose choice is always better than our own. So this is a similar thing we talked about when we discussed patience, is that it's easier to be patient with certain things that we ourselves decide to choose, but very much more difficult for the things that we don't control, that we didn't choose to go through. So the same thing when it comes to the things that make us small, is that it's much better for us to be able to receive those that just come to us by God's will, rather than to seek out trying to be made small, because as we talked about in the previous chapters, is that can be a kind of false humility when we want others to see our littleness. So he concludes here and he says, I have told you many things which will appear quite hard to you when you consider them, but believe me, they will be sweeter than sugar and honey when you practice them. Yes, this is, God's ways are very different from our own ways, and very few of us desire to feel little. We want to feel great, but feeling small compared to God, it helps us to rely more completely upon Him, and it's much better for our souls and will help us grow in holiness. So he says that though this is very difficult, it appears very hard, that when we actually are in the midst of it, as many of the saints lived their lives, we will find just how sweet thinking the way God thinks really is. God bless.